which include a wonderful list of collaborators, including the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies and its Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative, of which many of us are members, UNESCO, the International Taskforce on Teachers for Education 2030, of course, Education International, Oxfam, and the Lego Foundation. So during our session today, and as part of the Teacher Task Force policy theme for this week's event, we have two objectives: to provide an opportunity for rich discussion and debate among diverse stakeholders about the challenges, opportunities, and lessons learned from successful examples for better supporting teachers in crisis contexts throughout the policy process. And through these efforts to generate findings to inform and strengthen policy guidance in support of refugee and national teachers and other teachers of different profiles who are working in crisis and refugee contexts. So the way we're going to do this today during our time together is we're going to kick things off in a few moments with a highlighted speaker, followed by a moderated discussion with several panelists. And you can see the names of our distinguished speakers on the slides. So welcome to our session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my fellow co-host, Charlotte, to introduce our highlighted speaker. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks a lot, Mary, and welcome everybody to this webinar. It is also my pleasure to welcome Peter Tabishi, who will be with us today. Peter is a teacher at the Kericho Mixed Day Secondary School in Pwani village in the Rift Valley in Kenya. He is also the winner of the Global Teacher Prize 2019 and UN in Kenya Person of the Year 2019 again. He was chosen from over 10,000 teachers who came from all corners of the globe, teaching in remote towns and villages, to inner city schools, advocating for inclusivity and for child rights. His community is not unlike other rural villages in Africa and serves as an example of the challenges Africa education systems, communities, and schools are facing in educating the next generation of children in Africa. Thank you for being with us today, Peter. I now invite you to come off mute, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlotte, for such a warm welcome. It is my pleasure to participate in today's event. Teachers contribute to the growth, development, and well-being of their learners, their families, and the larger communities they work in. This is true in times of peace, and even more important during times of conflict, disruption, and displacement. Teachers perform multiple roles and responsibilities, as you are all aware. That include teaching in their classrooms, providing social-emotional support to their learners, engaging with families and communities, and oftentimes taking on additional roles when needed. The COVID-19 health pandemic has both changed and added to teachers' efforts, as in many places, teachers are now asked to move about the community to meet their learners during school closures. These efforts may focus on teaching some parts of the curriculum, providing guidance and counseling, and encouraging learners to return to school when it is safe to do so, as many learners now face new pressures to work, get married, and start families. During the health pandemic, at a personal level, I set up a project whose main aim was to help students from underprivileged families to continue learning during the school closures. And this, it involved providing a selected group of students with low-cost mobile phones, because they don't have the computers, those desktops, it's very costly. So they had to get the low-cost mobile phones, weekly internet bundles, because there's no Wi-Fi in many places, and because it's also in a remote area. And of course, they also got continuous online mentorship. This work was done in collaboration with other teachers, parents, and neighboring schools. And our role as teachers focused on coaching and mentoring these learners. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I also participated in various webinar meetings like this one with other teachers and educators across the world to share and learn on the way forward after the school closure. And before the pandemic, I worked with the community members in Nakuru, Kenya, to start using drought-resistant crops that could sustain families through the dry season. As teachers, we work hard to provide quality education to our learners, but teachers in many places are inadequately supported to perform their duties, let alone thrive and succeed in educating the next generation. There is a serious underinvestment in teachers around the world, and the situation is particularly serious in crisis affected and displacement areas. In addition to gaps in funding, teachers work in these areas face numerous challenges that include inadequate recruitment practices, low compensation, barriers to certification, and a lack of sustained and relevant professional development opportunities. We are paying increasing attention to the importance of learner well-being, but what about teacher well-being? What is needed to holistically support teachers in terms of their professional and personal well-being? How can we expect teachers to succeed in their roles without adequate support, teaching and learning materials, collaboration, and guidance? What about teachers who are now refugees themselves and have become teachers in an effort to give back to their communities while displaced? Are they being recognized, supported, and provided with the opportunity to continue to grow and develop as teachers over the long term? And what about teachers who have been internally displaced within their own countries? What are their needs? What kind of support do they require to continue their work? And what about national teachers working in places with large numbers of refugees? What kind of additional support do they need to respond to the needs of all their learners, including those whose lives have been disrupted due to conflict? And that's why I'm delighted to support the INEE Teachers in Crisis Context Collaborative Call to Action, which asks local, national, and global stakeholders to do the following. Number one, prioritize teachers from very onset of an emergency through to recovery and development with increased financial investments, better data, and effective planning so that adequate numbers of teachers, including female and minority teachers, are teaching where and when they are needed most. Second, respect teachers, including volunteers and facilitators, as individuals and professionals with appropriate and equitable recruitment policies, pay and employment terms, and working conditions. Third, enable teachers to support all learners by continuously investing in and dramatically improving the nature and the quality of teacher preparation, continuous professional development, and sustained support. And then support teachers' well-being, recognizing the impact of crisis on teachers in their own lives and in their ability to do work, and providing comprehensive support to teachers at the individual, school, community, and the national levels. And lastly, listen to teachers' expertise, experiences, and opinions, because they also have a voice. They need to be given a listening ear by including them in the decision-making bodies and the coordination mechanisms, program design and implementation, and research efforts. As a dedicated teacher, I will continue to work hard to meet the needs of my learners, and I speak for my fellow teachers around the world who continue to make it work despite the the inadequate support, we need stronger and better policies and practices for teacher management, teacher professional development, and teacher well-being to enable to continue strengthen the quality of education and the quality and the well-being of teaching force, especially in settings affected by conflict, displacement, climate change, and health and the health pandemics. I look forward to hearing about the continued progress of this initiative, and I wish you all the best for a rich discussion during today's session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Peter. And thanks for sharing this inspiring opening speech. And thanks also for supporting the call to action that we are working collectively to strengthen and expand across the education sector. So thanks for that. I'll now turn things to Mary for the next part of our session.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. And I'll just briefly share my screen and make some adjustments here. Great. One moment. Okay. I'll come back and spotlight all of our speakers into this next session. But yes, thank you, Peter, for joining us and sharing those remarks. It's really wonderful to hear your perspective. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move into the moderated discussion with our panelists. And I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Caseley Olabode Stevens. Caseley is an education policy officer for the Department of Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation at the African Union Commission. And Caseley, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panelists. Caseley, can you hear me okay? And hopefully you're able to connect. Hopefully we're not having any technical problems here. Yeah, Caseley, are you able to hear us? Here we go. I think you're there. There you are. Hello, welcome. So I just introduced you. Hopefully you were able to hear that, and I'll leave it to you to introduce our panelists today. Thank you, Caseley.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary. Our panelists today, we have Constance Alessio from Uganda, and we also have Yusuf Hamad from Chad. We also have George Moga Benjamin from South Sudan, and we have Clara Pratt from Kenya. You are welcome to this event. And briefly, I will mention that you are encouraged to have a free brief statement when needed to ensure time for all panelists, and also that you are also encouraged to gently interrupt contributions to keep the discussion moving forward. Also, you are encouraged to also signify by raising your hand, should in case you have a comment or you have any input to what another speaker has said. And also the audience, you are also requested to type your questions, your inputs, your comments in the chat box. So thank you very much. You are welcome. I will go forward by, directing the questions of the day to our panelists. And the first question goes to all the panelists. And we know that refugee teachers are critical actors in the refugee education. And they also account for a significant proportion of incentive workers in the managed camp setting. And my question is, how will you characterize the education policy environment for teachers that are supporting refugee learners nationally and regionally? I want the intervention from all the speakers, from Constance, from Clara, from Yusuf, and Benjamin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all from Uganda. Looking at the policy environment in Uganda, we have Uganda has a progressive refugee policy that allows refugees to be able to find work where they are qualified and where that is available. And then within that policy framework, we have the education. The policy for education also allows the teachers who are qualified and certified should be able to, can be able to access opportunities for teaching and learning. And if we look at what's happening within the settlement schools and the refugee communities where the teachers work, most of the teachers in Uganda happen to be nationals, because the numbers, we have very huge numbers of learners, and then of the ones of the refugees who are teachers and who are qualified, the numbers are not commensurate with the need. So as a result, in terms of recruitment, much of those who have been recruited were Ugandan teachers, but we do have a number, about 10% or so, who are refugees. And and one of the issues I think that we're dealing with currently is the fact that some of the teachers who have a qualification and who would be eligible to being recruited may not have certification that they're certified as teachers, or they may have lost their documents. And as a result, that places them at a disadvantage. Then the second policy environment I wanted to mention is a very new policy that we have. We call it the Uganda Teacher Policy. And that policy has recognized the need to professionalize the teaching profession, to make sure that teachers have opportunity for different career paths, whether it is opportunity within the teaching pathways, or within specialist pathways, or within leadership pathways. So that policy makes provision for that. And then secondly, the policy is also very strong on continuous professional development of teachers. This is because when we had the influx right from 2016 through to 2019, 2020, one of the things that happened was the education response was very, very quick, but also in the process of, there was need to be able to harmonize the kind of teaching that is provided, and also in terms of whether it is the kind of training that is provided, whether it is the short-term trainings to be able to orient teachers into the crisis context, or more pedagogical trainings that are provided. So that has been addressed in the current teacher policy that has already been launched. And then we also have a teacher management information system, where all the teachers who are qualified should be able to register into an online platform, and they get support from their head teachers to be able to do that, so that we have a database of the qualified teachers who've been certified, and also to be able to have an understanding of what the support is like. And this is not just for refugees, this is across the board. I'll pause here so my colleagues can speak. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Constance. Constance has highlighted some of the policies needed. The new one talking about the teaching professional framework and the teacher management information system for the database. So I will call on Yusuf for your intervention. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je voudrais.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear organizers, thank you for inviting me to take the floor in this session. Before I can start answering this question, I would like to pay tribute to all teachers worldwide, but in particular to teachers who teach in refugee camps, who teach in communities to support learning for refugees. I would like to recall the action framework for the implementation of Directive number 4. It states that teachers need to be better recruited, well-trained, well-qualified, motivated, and supported as part of efficient and effective systems. Unquote. As far as Chad is concerned, since 2014, we've improved the integration of refugees within our education system, our national education system. And to that goal, we've implemented a transition approach that enabled us to train our teachers in our state schools, in our state system, so that they can teach in refugee camps. And over 350 teachers from primary schools were sent to refugee camps. And on top of that, over 140 teachers were asked to teach in secondary schools. And the objective is to facilitate some transition. And at the same time, we hired some refugee teachers to be able to train them in our vocational schools and in our teachers training colleges. The question that we ask ourselves now is the following: is the teaching environment in refugee camps good enough? Meaning that we need to see if we have the right recruitment policy for teachers. Do we have a good policy for the well-being of teachers? And do we have the right policy for teachers' professional development? And do we have the right policy in terms of teacher professionalization? So are there some documents or policies that are truly adapted to the context of refugees? We decided in Chad to create a dynamic of social cohesion. And the government in Chad has made official all of these agreements in the refugee camps in the north and in the south of the country. So in the lake region with the border with Sudan, and also in the south of the country. So all of this was done in order to foster the integration of refugees. And we know that anyone can become a refugee at some point. So in Chad, we know that those refugees are our brothers and sisters. And education is a right. And that is why Chad decided to foster the integration of refugees. We are currently readjusting our policy for teachers to take into account the community teachers as well as refugees and IDPs. We developed an overall policy plan that will be implemented across the education sector. And as part of this plan, we are going to make sure that we can have an equitable education system. Teachers who teach in refugee camps will, of course, be included in this plan. So now, regarding the professional development of teachers, meaning that if a teacher has completed their professionalization pathway, we can offer other types of activities. And with the current support of UNHCR, we've managed to develop other types of approaches for what we call AGR for teachers in Chad. So these are the various projects that we have underway in Chad. And the objective is always to improve the education environment. Today, we are still facing a number of challenges. There are, of course, challenges that are related to this social lack of security, meaning that with refugee communities, we know that there is always the threat of terrorism. And this is an invisible war that we are waging. That is why the strategy that was adopted by our government was to start by securing our borders so that education practices can continue. And this led us to redefine our education policy. Did we include as well all of the planning of responses to natural disasters? And we also need to see if we have enough training dedicated to teachers to face the various crises that we can face. So this is what I wanted to share with you as an introduction, and I stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idris, and thank you very much for the interpreter. From Idris' presentation, we have seen the need for policy for teaching profession, to establish teaching and a distinguished profession and a preferred career. We have also seen the need for the teacher qualification framework for teacher quality and the framework of standard for competence for teaching profession. We've also seen the need for equitable education system, which consider the teachers in refugee setting, and the need to secure teachers in refugee setting and also invest in them. Thank you very much, Mr. Idris. Thank you. I will go to our, I'll call on George from South Sudan for your intervention. Thank you very much.
So we need to check quickly to see if Mr. Moga was able to join us.
Okay.
And there was a connection here from the Galaxy, a phone. I'm not sure if that is Mr. Moga, but at the moment, I'm not sure he's with us.
Okay. Can we?
We could go to Clara from UNHCR.
Okay. Can Clara?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what I was also reflecting on is thinking about historically where we were and what we're advocating for now. We've gone through a massive shift when it comes to refugee education, and it also meant that the policy environment has had to shift and adapt. Around 30 years ago, 40 years ago, refugee education was mostly run through parallel systems with where refugee children and teachers were following the home country curriculum. However, with the drive towards more inclusive education systems, which were also outlined quite nicely by Yusuf from Chad, even within UNHCR and our 2030 education strategy, we're advocating for more quality education where all children are included into the national system. And this starts by ensuring that we have trained refugee and national teachers who are able to support the specific needs of the refugee learners. And in many of the camp settings that we find in the Eastern Horn of Africa region, education is very much characterized by refugee teachers standing in the classroom. And this means that in order for the children to have quality accredited education, teachers must also be included in that same national system from pre-service to in-service training. And this is only possible if there is a conducive policy environment, such as what we've heard from Connie in Uganda. And teacher selection and training has to be part and parcel of the national systems. So in many of the other countries in this region, it's actually very difficult for a refugee to obtain the right to work. I think we've only got a conducive environment when it comes to livelihoods in Rwanda and Uganda. But in other countries, to get a paid teaching position, it's very much linked to receiving a voluntary stipend, as well as trying to receive ongoing training opportunities and professional support. This is often given by implementing partners who are managing the schools in the camps. And so this situation very much leads to the deprofessionalization of teaching, which has serious consequences because also in many camps, teacher salaries are pegged to a harmonized incentive worker approach. And so this means that a teacher can earn the same as a daily laborer who has no professional qualifications or education. And so this leads to many refugee teachers to leave the profession and try and find money in other jobs. And we recognize that amongst the refugee community, we have very well qualified teachers from their home countries who've been teaching for 10 or 15 years before they were displaced. However, once they move across a border, they are only recognized as unqualified teachers within the national system because they don't have that national accreditation, despite being qualified in their home countries. And so if we were to qualify the policy environment across the region, it is not that favorable because we're not able to recognize the foundational basic teaching skills and teacher qualifications that many of the refugee teachers hold. And so this makes it very difficult for teachers to take up positions and be recognized and paid appropriately. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you for your intervention. From here is the need for incentive for teachers at refugee setting and a proper policy for the teacher mobility in our countries. Thank you very much. Is Moga, has he joined?
I don't believe so, unfortunately, but I think we can continue the conversation, and if he's able to join, we'll let you know.
Okay, that's that for question one. So I think it's only Benjamin Moga that is not here. So I will move forward to question two, and question two is directed to Constance and Clara. And the question states, what are the policy openings and or barriers for supporting teachers in refugee hosting contests, including refugee teachers? The policy opening and barrier for supporting teachers in refugee hosting contests, including refugee teachers. Constance and Clara, just between 3 to 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think with regard to the opportunities within Uganda, with the policy in Uganda for refugee teachers, I think we, like I mentioned earlier, because of the progressive policy in general, I think we have opportunity to be able to harmonize, the conditions for teachers. I'll give an example very quickly. When I did mention that we had an influx in Uganda from 2016, and one of the things that happened was we had a very large community from especially South Sudan, which they were multi-ethnic, very many different languages. And in Uganda, we have the early childhood, preschool especially, is usually taken in the mother tongue or the dominant language of the community. So when we realized that that would be a challenge, then we had a level of teachers whom we called assistant teachers, who were more to be able to help interpret, but also to guide, to help the national teachers to be able to guide the learners in the classroom. And as a result, and these are informal because within the framework, it doesn't have provision for assistant teachers, but we had provision within the refugee settings to be able to take on assistant teachers. Now, because they're already within the school system, and in a sense, they were receiving a very small pay, as it was more just like, not even a stipend, just a contribution, but it wasn't commensurate with what other qualified teachers were getting. And you find when you look at the profile of these teachers, for example, some of them were actually qualified teachers. What they only lacked was the documentation to show that, yes, they got this qualification, they have the certificate, they have duly registered with the teachers, about either in South Sudan or their countries of origin or within Uganda. So because of that, you'd find somebody who's qualified then is taken on as an assistant teacher, and then they're not able to enjoy the privileges of teachers of the qualified teachers. But within the new teacher policy, which I said was assented to and ratified in 2019, there is now a very, very deliberate effort that when we have teachers in the system already, there is a requirement to be able to look at their professional development. What opportunities are there, whether it is in service or it is pre-service. And secondly, there is also provision to be able to ensure that when there is a training under professional development, then it should be standardized. It shouldn't just be an orientation for half a day or 1 day, but it should be a training that can then contribute credits to the qualifications and the career path of the teacher. So I think those two are all.
I think we have a little bit of a delay in the connection here. Hopefully it will reset. And if not, maybe we need to move to another speaker until we sort that out.
Yes. I think we need to move to another speaker because of our time.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in.
Okay, thank you for your intervention, Clara. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, and I think what Connie was also mentioning was really this main common barrier around refugee teacher qualifications not being recognized in the hosting country, which is really unfortunate because it means that teachers aren't able to really fulfill their full potential. And that's why we need to have these positive steps like what Uganda was saying towards recognizing their certification. And I think increasingly, even at a regional level, we're seeing a lot of positive steps towards building this kind of a policy system. So, for example, back in 2017, the 7 IGAD countries met in Djibouti and signed the Djibouti Declaration, which included a commitment to strengthen regional frameworks that promote the inclusion of refugee teachers and their professional development and certification into national education systems. And so the IGAD platform has really provided this space for countries to take a regional approach to this challenge and ensure that their country level policies are being put in place that are beneficial to all. So not just for refugee teachers, but also when another refugee crosses a border and they become when a national becomes a refugee in another country, they can take their certification with them. And it's really encouraging to see the progress being made within these regional frameworks, because it gives countries the platform to discuss and include opportunities for the inclusion of teachers into national sector education plans as well as policies. And as part of this platform as well, GIZ, in coordination with ministries of education in Uganda, Ethiopia, in Sudan, has been rolling out a series of teacher trainings that are supporting qualified refugee teachers from their home countries to undertake short-term bridging trainings within the national curriculums and education systems in the hosting countries, because what is recognized is that the pedagogy and the classroom management are all transferable skills which they've already attained, but what they need is that step up to ensure that their professional qualifications are amplified through the ongoing training in the new country of asylum. And so if there are these conducive policy environments that recognizes the teacher qualification, then we can continue to undertake these teacher development projects that will allow them to teach the new curriculum in the hosting country. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clara, for your intervention. I will also give an opportunity to Mr. Yusuf for his intervention regarding this. Thank you. You are welcome, Mr. Yusuf.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je vais aussi
Yes, thank you very much. I would just like to add to what my colleagues have just said. For the second question concerning opportunities and barriers as far as refugee teachers are concerned now in Chad, the main challenges when we took in a lot of Sudanese refugees was due to language problems, because we realized 10 years later that we hadn't gone about it the right way. It took us a long time and a lot of investment, financial and other investment, to realize this. Now, what is important is that what we actually managed quite well in Chad for Sudanese refugees who had gotten diplomas in our professional schools, there is a national commission with UNESCO chairs, etc. Along with all these partners, we have designed a homologation system to recognize their degrees. So, in other words, refugee teachers' degrees were recognized and that they could teach in our country. So we have tried to learn from our mistakes. It has been a learning curve, and we are trying to encourage refugees to decide where they want to go, in which schools, professional schools they want to integrate. And so the idea is really to give them the appropriate training so that once they go back to their own country, if at all, they have the right opportunities, or indeed if they want to stay on in our country, that they have the opportunities to develop their careers in our country. So we try to give them as many possibilities as possible in order to develop their career. But we do need to take into account these language barriers, because I think that is really important. And also the security issues. Of course, if there is no security ensured, then it becomes very difficult for refugee teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yusuf, for your intervention. You are well noted. Since Constance was, we lost Constance while she was speaking, I want to quickly call if she has additional input to what she already said. Constance?
Yes, please. Apologies for that break. I think I'll leave off the video to make sure the connection stays stable. Yeah, quickly, just to add to what I mentioned with regard to the opportunity presented in the policy framework, I think we, looking at the teacher well-being and the teacher remuneration, we now have opportunity to look at a harmonization of teacher salaries. Basically because in the past, because we had a parallel system of training, recruitment and management of teachers within the humanitarian system. And now because the Education Response Plan Secretariat has been put in place to manage the transition from that system into the development nexus, I think we've been able to have the first step to put up minimum teacher salaries for especially teachers within the refugee and the settlement schools, and that is pegged to the minimum standard of the government teacher, because the teachers working within the refugee context, whether they were nationals or refugees, some of them were getting less pay, and the payments were because there were different partners who were managing that system. And now we've been able to agree and say there should be a minimum, and that should be pegged to the government. And it isn't still as as much as sufficient as should be, looking at the cost of living. But at least we see that that is a first step towards going to towards moving into a more conducive well-being management system for teachers and well-being considerations. I think I will quickly stop at that. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Constance. Thank you for the intervention. While Clara was, speaking, she briefly mentioned the Djibouti Declaration. I'd like to call on the speakers, Mr. Yusuf, Clara, and Constance, if you can briefly speak about this, if anyone can speak about this Djibouti Declaration and how it is being implemented. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can maybe expand a little bit more on that. So back in 2017, the 7 IGAD countries, which consist of Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, South Sudan, and I'm forgetting one. Djibouti, came to Djibouti, so all the ministries of education came to Djibouti and signed a declaration where they gave several commitments linked to the inclusion of refugees into the national education system, and thereby also committing to developing national education sector plans that included refugees, national education sector costed budgets for specifically for refugee inclusion, but also including things around teacher qualifications, teacher training, as well as opportunities for higher education, so that if you are a refugee and have been displaced, that your qualification, your university qualifications can also be accredited in the different countries. And so this has been a process that now has annual meetings that is being led by the IGAD Secretariat to really update on progress against the commitments made in Djibouti, as well as commitments made during the GRF, so the Global Refugee Framework. And so this is for us really the fact that you have these countries who have made these commitments. It is a great advocacy tool for us to be able to see how are we pushing this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara. Please, any intervention from Yusuf and Constance?
Further to what Clara has just shared, I'd like to say that Uganda also in meeting the commitment mentioned in the Djibouti Declaration was able to establish the costed implementation plan and then set up the secretariat that I coordinate. And that was really to be able to strengthen the coordination, but also manage the transition from humanitarian into the development nexus. But more importantly, also identify priorities. What are the key priority issues for advocacy? What are the key priority issues for resource mobilization? And also to be able to look at the local government setting to understand how can, since that is where implementation happens, how is it possible to be able to pick up the key issues and quickly be able to, escalate them or make sure that there is sufficient advocacy to be able to respond. And in that regard, besides the secretariat that was set up and the costed implementation plan, we're now in the 4th year of that. Besides that, we also have a pilot program which is funded by the GIZ and IGAD collaboration that Clara mentioned, where we have a selection of 100 teachers, and these 100 teachers are receiving training, which is in response to a needs assessment, where students, learners, and the teachers themselves were asked to say, what would you like to see in your teacher? What are the gaps that are missing? And also asking the teachers, what are their needs? Where do they see support in terms of pedagogy, in terms of, emerging competencies, and emotional intelligence, whether it is mental health and psychosocial support. And then in regard to that, I think there was a very elaborate training support that was put up as a pilot. But then what was so exciting in this opportunity was the involvement of national teacher training colleges, and the instructors were the instructors who work in the national teacher training colleges, and then they were selected to be able to, they went through the training, of course, and then they were able to manage the training and deliver the training. And I think by March or so, we'll be able to get feedback from both the participants and the trainers. And I think those are some really very deliberate and significant steps that we are making with regard to, achieving the commitments that Uganda made in the Djibouti Declaration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Constance. Mr. Yusuf, your hand was up. Any intervention from you?
Oui. Oui. Bien, merci.
Yes, thank you. We were not involved in that particular initiative that led to the Djibouti Declaration. Indeed, we had already included, prior to that, IDPs and refugees in our education plan. And this is something that we had already done in 2017. In our education plan, we had already included all questions related to IDPs and refugees. If we take the example of Lake Chad, we already have teachers that are teaching in the refugee camps and that are funded by our education department. So that was a very concrete step. And we were also able to train teachers to the hazards related to natural disasters and mining accidents. So we were able to do this as part of our resilience fostering efforts for our education system. Now, we are still facing a challenge, and that is financing those efforts. Indeed, you can have a sector-based plan, and this is our nationwide policy tool. However, with the major inflow of refugees to Chad, there is a strong demand for education in refugee camps. So what we are doing at the moment is that we are getting more organized, and we are setting priorities. And refugees are really at the core of the government's priorities. As I said before, in Chad, we do not draw any distinction between refugees and Chad nationals. And this is really a part of our culture. In our country, refugees are entitled to a good quality education, as is any other person living in our country. So we still have that particular challenge to face that is related to financing. Now, to go back to our education policy, our objective is really to establish some connection with the humanitarian agencies as well, as my colleague said before. And this is really the way forward, and this is what the Chad government is working on at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Thank you for your intervention. I think we are through with the policy opening and the barriers, and also the Djibouti declaration. I will also still encourage the participants to type their questions as they follow, to type their questions on the chat box. So now I will go to another question, and this question is directed to Yusuf and Moga, but unfortunately Moga is not has not joined. Mr. Yusuf, I will direct the question to you, and should in case Clara and Constance, you have any input to that, you can also contribute. The question is, what national education policy challenges or other concerns would you like education stakeholders to keep in mind in their efforts to provide support to education for refugee and displaced teachers and learners? National education policy challenges that you would like education stakeholders to keep in mind while providing support to education for refugee and displaced teachers and learners. Thank you very much.
Bien, merci pour cette question.
Thank you for this question. This is a highly relevant question. First of all, from a strategic point of view, as far as the refugees' needs are concerned, well, we have a vision for education in terms of public authorities. Education is the responsibility of everyone, and not just governments. All stakeholders, including civil society, need to contribute to education. And with that in mind, public authorities are now invited to implement national education plans. These national policy plans should include that notion of equitable education. Everyone is entitled to good quality education. Refugees, IDPs, nationals, everyone should be included in that plan. Education is really about equity. It's about balance. And we should also allow teachers to diversify their training and revenue opportunities. We also need to make sure that they are prepared to shocks and disruptions. And this is really at the core of our national concerns. And this is why, whether we're talking about policy makers, local governments, financial partners, teachers really need to be included in the development of these national plans. This is essential if we want to make sure that we can make tangible actions, and if we want to make sure that we can see teachers as a priority, including for those teachers who operate in refugee camps. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is the fact that, as I said, financing is a major challenge. We have vocational schools, we have other types of schools at the moment that are open to teachers, to IDPs, and to refugees or returnees. Anyone that is in a vulnerable or precarious situation can access these vocational schools. So the question here is not to welcome refugees, but it's more related to a question of social rights, of international rights. Now, focusing on the example of Chad now. Regarding what I said about curricula, well, we need to develop our policies on our curricula, but we need our curricula to take into account the reality of teachers teaching in refugee camps. So we do not want to draw that distinction between refugees and nationals. This distinction is banned in Chad. So what I mean to say is that in our country, we have many refugees who work. And we also have refugee teachers who teach in schools in our country. And this is related to the national cohesion efforts that have been made by the current government. And this allows the refugees' children to be fully involved in our education sector. So this is how we can develop our equitable policy. Now, there is one thing that we need to keep in mind, is the crisis of skills and training of teachers. I think that this is a challenge that every country in the world is facing, because the better we train teachers, the more we have a lack of motivation in terms of incentives, including compensation. So I think that we need to develop the right policies. And in those policies, we really need to take into account the question of social protection to make sure that teachers can operate in a better environment. We need to make sure that teachers can operate in an environment where their well-being is taken into account. So this is what we need to do, although we are facing both a financial crisis at the moment and the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. I will also assure you that your interventions for access and inclusion professional skill for teachers to be our priority. Financing, for teachers has been noted, taken note of. Thank you very much. I don't know if Clara or Constance has any intervention to this.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to also highlight two important considerations. One is related to considerations for attracting and retaining effective teachers, because to be able to, to be able to make sure that the teachers can progress and can be able to stay on within the teaching profession, what strategies to put in place to make sure when they come, whether it's the management, whether it is the well-being, whether it is the needs, the requirements they need are provided for. A quick example will be like when they have to go for teachers required to go for professional development or for refresher courses. And in terms of management of that, to make sure that there is time provided, whether it is time during the school term or time during the holidays, it's important to be able to plan for that and see how do you handle, teachers' need to be able to take time to have refresher courses, and yet handling the need to also have learners be able to have a teacher, especially in needs where the numbers of teachers are constrained, they're already handling large classes. So it might be, it might not be a very, very urgent from the management perspective. Sometimes that is looked at as not very, very critical, and there is oversight in that regard. But if teachers are to progress, and if they're to get better, and if they're to improve their qualifications, I think that is a very, very necessary consideration. And then the second consideration that I'd like to mention is also related to the 21st century skills and the skills for remote learning, especially in this time when we've had time away and away from school for learners. Learners have been away from school a lot, and then to be able to see how do you manage these learners, but also how can teachers be supported to manage themselves with regard to the mental health needs, the psychosocial support needs that they might have, and also just the general challenge that they have in having children who've been out of routine, I mean out of the school routine. I think those are very important considerations to be able to make as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Constance. Clara, any intervention from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, which was briefly mentioned, which was around the language of instruction, because I think sometimes this is some of the most challenging things for refugee teachers, especially when it is a fresh influx, so a new emergency, when we've just crossed the borders. We've just seen that in East Sudan, where the national language of instruction is Arabic. However, what the Sudanese government has also done is they have a second official language of instruction, which is English, which is something that a lot of the teachers are already familiar with. And so for them to make a transition into teaching from Tigrinian into English was a much easier transition than teaching from Tigrinian into Arabic. Either way, teachers are going to have a language program. So we're not just teaching children the new language in the hosting country, but we're also giving that instruction to the teachers themselves to enable them to be able to teach in the new curriculum. And so it's really important that we have these conversations with national ministries of education when we think through what is the language of the refugees, what's the national language of instruction, how do we kind of find a convenient way to make sure they're still following the accredited national system, but without having so many barriers to climb related to language. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clara. In the interest of time, I'll go to our last question. The question goes to Constance and Yusuf. The question states, what steps need to be taken to enable more innovation in policy making? Innovation in policy making on who might be involved and how, and what new sources of evidence might be drawn on. We need more innovation in policy making. Who are those to be involved? How are they going to be involved? What are the new sources of evidence that we need to draw from? So the question goes to Constance and Yusuf. So Constance, briefly, please, because of our time.
Thank you. I think one very quick way in which the innovations are taken at, usually the refugee influxes provide opportunity for responding to a need, and that is where the creativity comes up. I can mention things like double shift school systems, which come up because there's large numbers and the infrastructure is very limited. And then what happens with that is there's a need to be able to standardize what do you put in place to make sure that you can effectively have adequate learning happening within the reduced time frame. And then when that is happened, and when that has been piloted a few times, then that is also presented as evidence of what works, and it is easier at the government setting to be able to accommodate that. And we've had that here in Uganda setting as well, where we did that just in a few schools, but then the guidelines were put in place, and when this was shared with the ministry, there was receptivity to that, to say, okay, I think this has not been happening at primary level, but because of the need and because of the critical nature of issues that are happening, we need to be able to see how to take this on board. So we're in that process. The second one is also related to how special needs education, children with learning disability, and the need to be able to make sure that you can be able to have teachers who are, who have the right skills are included as well. And sometimes it is put as a policy, but in terms of the practice, because of the frequency of the monitoring within the refugee setting, especially from the protection perspective, you find this also provides opportunity to be able to understand what is working and then to pick those up and then to escalate them, but also to share the good practices. And these good practices, then that become the foundation for, for policy or initiatives as well.
Thank you very much, Constance. Sir Yusuf, briefly, sir, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this highly relevant question once again. First of all, regarding the steps that are needed in order to develop an innovative set of policies. Well, first of all, we need to think about strategic planning. And this strategic planning needs to cater for the urgent, immediate needs of refugees. The other element that we need to take into account is inclusive education, as my colleague said before. Inclusive education means that special needs children are not left behind. So we need to make sure that we provide those children the same education opportunities as other children. Another step is the document that policies are based on for the activities that are needed in order to create a positive teaching environment. So these are the three pillars on which we are working right now. Now, to conclude, I'd like to add a fourth element to my answer. We need to use statistics and data that are integrated into our national education information system. And this would be a way of identifying obstacles and challenges and provide teachers with concrete solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Thank you for your intervention. Mary, over to you for the steps. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Caseley, and to all of our panelists. We do have a few minutes, and we're going to have to be a bit efficient with our time, but we wanted to open up for Q&A, questions and answers, and to bring in some of the voices from the room there in Kigali or from the participants in our Zoom room. And so if we could just take a few minutes to see if there are some burning questions that have emerged as we listen to our wonderful panelists today. I invite you, and maybe we could start in the room in Kigali, and if someone would like to ask a question, Leila or one of your colleagues can maybe help us there. And in the Zoom room, if you could put up your Zoom hand, we can come to you after that. But it'd be great to hear from our colleagues in Kigali.
Yeah, we have a comment here.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but it's rather a comment, because the topic under discussion is a very interesting one. My name is Ismail. I work with UNESCO, but I'm based in Uganda. I want to agree with Clara and Connie when they made mention of the different aspects that they did. But I think scanning through it comes clear that there have not been any deliberate policies directed towards teachers in the crisis context. Whereas we have the global frameworks, like the Global Compact on Refugees, like the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, and different other, there are no concrete policies as we see that actually address the issues of the teachers in the crisis context. Certification and equalization of teacher qualifications is a very big problem, as Connie alluded to when she was giving the experience from Uganda. And indeed, that's something that probably will require a policy statement or a policy stand as far as these are concerned. But I can understand the fact that this is coming from the different education systems that different countries are running, and therefore the challenge in certification and equalization. UNESCO is working with the Ministry of Education in Uganda, together with the other partners, including UNHCR, to develop guidelines that will support the Ministry of Education to be able to certify refugee teachers in those different refugee camps in Uganda. Hopefully by end of next year, this is something that should be able to work. With a bit of additional bridging training, then the teachers who are found qualified in the refugee settlements should be able to get the certification equivalent of the Ugandan teachers, and therefore can be able to teach not only in the so-called refugee schools, but also in any school in any part of Uganda as a country. So that is something I thought I needed to highlight here, because that's some work that UNESCO is already doing with the Ministry of Education in Uganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I don't know, Connie, did you have any, I know he was offering a comment and some additional details there, but since he's referring to Uganda, is there anything you would like to add or comment on from your perspective?
I think really just to agree that he's touched on the point, but also to reflect back and to see that way back in 2015, also there was a framework that was basically looking at conflict and disaster management guidelines for education institutions. That one was more broader in terms of preparation, but I do agree that in terms of a gap, and the equation is even not just at the level of the teacher, but if we can go one step back at the level of all level qualifications or A-level qualifications, where you need to be able to have that the right qualification for a refugee who's still in the school system to be able to enter into the available opportunities for training. I think that is also the other aspect to this, not just looking at teachers who are already qualified now, but to see what provisions are we making. And in that regard, I can also quickly look at what we have to be able to have an advocacy system to bring in more students from either O-level to be able to get the scholarships, and then to be able to meet the minimum standards that are required, because I know the certification is a process and we might be able to get some little inroads here and there, but also looking to see how can we have a multi-pronged approach to that. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Connie. And are there any questions in the Zoom room? If you'd like to raise your Zoom hand or come off mute, you can also type them in the chat box. Okay, I see an applause. Wonderful. So I think, our panelists have raised a number of issues, and what I'd like to do is turn it to my co-host, Charlotte Burkan from UNHCR, to share a few of the highlights as we begin to conclude the session. So Charlotte, I'll pass it over to you. And thank you again to our moderator and our panelists. Very much enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mary, and a lot of very interesting issues raised today. So I'll try to be brief. So first, Connie addressed the key point of the policy environment and highlighted the importance of an inclusive policy framework that allows refugees to access education, but also dignified and sustainable employment, including for refugee teachers and, of course, national teachers working in refugee settings. And she uses, I think, a very interesting example of Uganda's teacher policy, which includes provision to ensure that teachers have this opportunity to develop their careers. Yusuf emphasized that SDG 4 and the specific target on teachers calls for teachers to be better recruited, well qualified, well motivated, and effectively supported. And it also allows us to recall that refugee teachers, when adequately supported, are particularly well placed to contribute to the improvement of the school environment in refugee settings. And he gave us the example of Chad, and in Chad, the policy of inclusion of refugees in the national education system since 2014 has provided for how it has provided for the development of national teachers in refugee camps, and in parallel, the inclusion of refugee teachers in national teacher training centers, so they can be trained, recognized, and can also contribute to the education of refugee children. Linked to this point, Clara reminded us that UNHCR education strategy emphasizes the importance of refugees being included in national education system in the host country. And she also reminded us of the essential role of teachers in addressing the specific educational needs of refugee children in the classroom. In terms of opportunities, our speakers highlighted how the recent Djibouti Declaration on Refugee Education, endorsed by all the IGAD member states, paves the way for a conducive policy environment, allowing recognition of professional qualification across borders. And I think it's also a very important point. And it is also, of course, an opportunity to develop harmonized and recognized professional development programs for refugee teachers in countries affected by situation of forced displacement. Connie also explained how this declaration has been implemented in Uganda through the development and budgeting of the National Education Response Plan for refugees and host communities. So all of this talked about, I mean, the importance of included refugee teacher, and Yusuf again exemplified that, explaining how in Chad, refugees were effectively included in the 2017 National Education Sector Plan, and how this inclusion allowed teachers to benefit from appropriate training. But he also recalled us of a key challenge in refugee situation, which is the challenge of sustainable funding. With a view to transitioning from short-term humanitarian intervention and funding to sustainable and long-term intervention and needed funding. Finally, our speakers also reminded us of some key consideration in refugee education, such as the need to develop the 21st century skills, but also the need for a better and enhanced inclusive education, and the issue of language of instruction, which is very important to be considered in refugee inclusion. I think there are some of the main points among all the very interesting points that have been raised by our speakers I wanted to highlight. And a huge thank you to all our panelists today for sharing their inspiring experiences with us. Thanks, Mary, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Charlotte. And I know that we're past our time here, so we're going to need to conclude, but as we do, we want to encourage everyone to stay involved in the Teachers in Crisis Context event series that will continue into the new year in 2022. We are conducting a number of different activities. Today's focus very much on the policy process and what's working well and where there are opportunities to strengthen and expand more inclusive policies for the different and diverse profiles of teachers. We're also connecting and consulting directly with teachers in different contexts through teacher consultations. We are curating a number of case studies around teacher management, teacher professional development, teacher well-being, school leadership and governance to again kind of bring to the forefront the different sets of activities and programs that different actors around the globe are using. Also interactive pedagogy is really, talking about what's happening inside the classrooms, inside the training and professional development sessions that we can learn from and benefit from. And continuing to meet with strategic stakeholders, donors, and other institutional actors who are also at the forefront of supporting teachers in their work. And so I believe Danny is putting in the chat box different links for following this initiative and for staying involved. And again, just a heartfelt thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And yeah, have a good rest of your day and a successful conclusion to the Policy Dialogue Forum there in Kigali. We're sorry we couldn't be with you, but I know you've had a wonderful event. So we'll look forward to learning from all of you afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And
Thank
cheers.
you. Thank you, Mary.